mentioned Principal Cesar before. We are in the building that Tag is in, and D4 is one of the few districts that has a citywide gifted and talented school. Parents wanted to know, what is your vision for G&T education? Can you make a commitment that G&T education will always be a part of the DOE? What are your positions in terms of access to G&T education, both at the K level, changing the entry points for that, and also possibly changing the SAT and the access to the specialized high schools? And how do we get and replicate the diversity that exists at this G&T school that does an amazing work for an incredibly diverse population of learners, high achieving learners in this building? How do we replicate that in other buildings and get more buildings like it and add more G&T schools to the program?
Man, that's a whole lot of topics right there. So let me just try to be succinct. So when we talk about differentiating instruction for different learners, most people, and I'm guilty, I just said it here in this public meeting, think about students that have to have material differentiated because they have learning disabilities or different challenges. It's the same thing, it's the same concept for differentiating learning for gifted students. Right? You can't put a gifted student in the traditional classroom with the traditional curriculum and expect them not to be bored or expect them not to be less than motivated. So you have to differentiate along the entire curriculum. Here's the challenge that I have with gifted and talented programs as I see them right now in New York City, and I visited a lot of gifted and talented programs. The program that we have here notwithstanding. When you have over 35% of your students being designated as gifted and talented, we need to bottle the water that we're drinking and ship it all over the place, because that is so far beyond the percentage of gifted and talented that from a statistical perspective should be found in the population. I'm just being honest with you. So what it tells me is the mechanisms that we're using to identify true gifted and talentedness perhaps are not the most robust to truly identify a gifted and talented student. And then what you do is you think about, how do we currently identify in many programs a student that is gifted and talented? Well, you have to sign up for a test, and you go get the test. And then I just read in the Wall Street Journal an article that talked about parents that are paying $400 an hour to tutor their 4-year-olds for this gifted and talented test. And then you look at who is being identified for gifted and talented, and when you think about the 1.1 million students in the New York City Department of Education, 70% of whom are Black and Latino students, yet don't even come close to representing the gifted and talented pool of students in our system. I am no detective, but something's not right.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that currently the thought or the exclusive process of using a test at 4 years old to identify a student for gifted and talented really measures more the privilege, and I'm not talking about wealth. I'm talking the privilege in the home of a student rather than the true giftedness or talentedness of a student. So
what? You saying my bullshit? You saying our kids aren't smart?
To make sure that the processes that we're using to identify students for gifted and talented are truly research-based, evidence-based, and truly are not skewed against any one particular group of students. That being said, I think it's important to have gifted and talented programs in a school system, and I'm not against gifted and talented. We've got some work to do around not only how we identify students, but then also where those programs are across our entire program.
Yes.
Now, elevate that conversation, and the way, part of the way we're doing that is that we're spending time going to programs across the system and identifying programs that have really great practices. So I can tell you, people have already visited this program here and have taken some really good notes about what are the great best practices around what's happening here. We're working with our superintendents and our principals and our executive superintendents. So we're gathering from the field what is that's happening. Now I want to just take that one step further. You asked a question about specialized high schools and specialized high school admission. Same thing. A lot of people have made a lot of an issue about the specialized high school admissions test, and they've said, Chancellor, why in the world are you spending all this time around 8 particular schools? Well, I will be the first to admit, and by the way, I don't call them elite schools. They're not elite schools. They are specialized schools. I can take you to schools that have no screens. I can take you to schools that take whoever comes and registers in their school, that are doing phenomenal things for kids and graduating great students. What are great schools do? Let me tell you where I stand on the specialized school, because everybody's read about it. The notion that you can test a 4-year-old and tutor a 4-year-old to be successful on a test, I saw a lot of people say, yeah, that's not okay. But think about what we do to our students that desire to go to a specialized school. And if they desire to go to a specialized school, God bless America, more power to them, I'm all for it. Okay? And let me be really clear. My oldest daughter, who just graduated from college, but my oldest daughter, when I lived in San Francisco, went to a specialized school. She did. Total transparency. Now, why do I tell you this? Because in our system, when we tell students in middle school, we want you to go to school every single day. Don't miss school. Sound right? We want you to do well in your school. We want you to do well in English and math and social studies and science. We want you to get involved in a sport. We want you to play an instrument. We want you to dance. We want you to paint. We want you to volunteer. None of that really matters if you want to go to a specialized school. Because all that matters is that you take one test on one Saturday for a few hours and get a certain cut score, and guess what? You get the opportunity, make sure we're clear on that, opportunity to go to a specialized school. It doesn't matter what your grades are. It doesn't matter what your attendance is. It doesn't matter what your community involvement is. And we know for a fact that there are families, God bless them, and some that can't afford it and go without, that will pay lots of money for many years to tutor their children for the specialized admissions test. By the way, that test is not aligned to state standards. So when we're telling students to do well in school and do well in their classes, what they're doing is doing well in the state standards, in the curriculum that gets them to master what the state of New York has said to do. But that doesn't matter, because if you want to go to specialized school, we want you to study and get tutored for another test that's not aligned to state standards. And it doesn't matter if you really go to school and give it all your all, because if you do well on this test, you get the opportunity. I don't know about you, but we're selling our families a bill of goods. And there is not one psychometrician, not one, that has validated that specialized high school admissions test as valid or reliable for identifying the gifted and talentedness of students to go to a specialized school. So we have a flawed test that has now been memorialized into state law. Remember I told you I've lived all over the United States? I've never seen a state legislature codify for local control a single process for admittance into a certain sect of schools. I said that to the lawmakers in Albany as well. I've never seen it. Talk about local control. So what I'm saying is there are other ways. When my daughter went to a specialized school, she had to take an admissions test that was aligned to the state standards in California, because we lived in California at the time. On top of that, she had to write an essay. On top of that, she had to get teacher recommendations. On top of that, all of her grades from middle school counted to a composite that gave a different picture of what it was that she was. Her extracurricular activities all counted. And it wasn't just one way of getting into a specialized school, it was multiple ways of getting into a specialized school, which gave more opportunity to more kids. Now, if you don't believe me just on those things, that the system is flawed, consider this. There are 165 specialized schools in the United States of America. 165. Of the 165 specialized schools in the United States of America, there are only 8 that use a single test as a sole criteria for admissions to a specialized school. And guess where all 8 of those are? New York City. So either we got it all figured out, or perhaps, oh, and by the way, that specialized admissions test, the analysis has shown that it is also flawed against girls, women. There are less females that are able to show admittance to specialized schools based on that test. So it's not only flawed, and by the way, Stuyvesant High School this past year, Of the hundreds of students admitted to the freshman class, there were 10 black students that were admitted to Stuyvesant. Yet the percentage of students, I just said, and there was, I can't remember the number, but there were less than 30 black and brown kids that got into Stuyvesant this past year based on that test. And 70% of the students in the New York City Department of Education are black and Latino.
So it's a racial quota.
It's not a racial quota. It's
That's what you're pushing for, a racial quota.
I'm not gonna argue with you, sir. You show me a test, show me a psychometrician that's validated that test, show me the data that shows that we are giving the opportunity to all students in the New York City Department of Education, and I'm listening. Nobody's been able to do that.
You're offering a racial quota in its
what I'm
replacement,
saying
though.
is it has to change. And when we have that kind of a disparity in our admissions process to a public school, we have to have that conversation, and I'm looking forward to that.
So then have more schools like this one to prepare them.
Before the next question, I also want to recognize, because she's